So today I'm doing a demonstration as our introduction to watercolor and showing the best way to create a color wheel. Hopefully you'll have your brushes from your art kit. The one that I would suggest using is the small flat brush, but this round brush will work fine as well. I have an old palette here, a glass of water, and also will be using a paper towel quite often. And as you can notice from my palette, these are bits of paint that have been sitting in the palette for a while. The beauty of the tube paints is that you can place them out into the palette and they remain there for a very long time. You simply have to re-wet them as you move along. If you don't have a palette, you can also feel free to use a white dinner plate. That would work just fine. Okay, in terms of the color, I'm suggesting that we work with the primaries first. And depending on what paint you're using, many of you do have the tubes, but you may have something else. You want to choose a very warm yellow, often called a cadmium yellow. If you're using the tubes, you probably have an ultramarine blue, and you also would have an alizarin crimson. Anything similar to those colors would be fine, but we'll be using the color wheel with only 3 primaries and mixing all of the colors from there. So since this pigment yellow I just put out is wet, I'm not really needing to add too much water, maybe just the littlest bit. I don't want to dilute the color. And in the color wheel that you created, you created these individual thin lines in between the color. And so in this case, you can leave that little bit of space. So there'll be a space between your colors. And you can also bring your color right out to beyond the outer edge of the color wheel, because we'll be cutting it down later. So you can see with the watercolor and using the flat brush, it works quite nicely. Each time I want to make sure I clean out my brush really well. I always get a little bit of the moisture off before I move to another color. The yellow isn't very strong, so I can now take my alizarin crimson or something very similar that you might have. Now this is already dried up, so you see how I'm having to re-wet this a little bit, which the water in the brush is helpful for. And the alizarin crimson is a slightly cooler red. If you have a warmer red, that'll be fine too, but it does change the kind of purple you'll get, for instance. So depending on what paints you're using, you'll get some variation. Now, you don't want to go back into the watercolor very much. And I'll make one more move over this, simply because as the watercolor starts to dry, it could change the effect. So even here, I will switch out my water. And I suggest you do this often so you don't contaminate the colors. And now I'm going into my ultramarine blue, getting a little more water on my brush. I don't want to water this down very much, but the color is dry in here, so I have to re-wet it a bit. And again, when I'm laying down these strokes, I'm overlapping them slightly as I go to get rid of any individual strokes and try to keep a nice flat area of color. And again, beyond that, I wouldn't go back in and touch it because some areas will start to be dried. Okay, again, I would get clean water often, but I'm going in now. I'm going to make my green. So I'm making my secondary colors now, and I'll take some of that straight yellow, add a little bit of blue to it. Again, we're using only those 3 primaries, and this is where I'm going to check and see what color I have. Now, first of all, I can see that that needs a little more pigment because it's a little more transparent than the other ones I was working on. So I will pick up a little more yellow. Blue is really intense, so that's actually, you don't need very much. So now let's check this out. So my pigment is a little more opaque here. And so I'm testing this. And I think that's a nice green. So I'm gonna go back and pick that up. You can cut your page of the color wheel slightly larger so you can test some of those colors. Okay, and again, I wouldn't go back and touch it again. So that's a good green. And I think while I have that, using that color, once I establish the secondary, I'll go in now and figure out what I would like. That yellow is a new tube of paint. Again, it's a little intense, so watering that down a bit. And now I just want to pull from my green just the littlest bit, again, because green and blue are stronger here. Let's test this. So I have a ways to go. There's a lot of testing before you put down your actual color that needs to happen. See there, I think I might have gone a little too far. I'm going to bring a little more yellow back into that mix. And I'm happy with this yellow green. So do all of your testing first, and also just take a look at how transparent or opaque the colors are. You want them to not be too transparent. And then lastly, I'll come back over to my green, to my blue, my ultramarine blue, add the littlest bit of the green. I'm creating a blue-green right now. That's actually a really nice mixture. I think I'm going to go with that. So feel free to sample as you go. Get a little more pigment on my brush there. But I'm really not adding much water to those paints that I'm mixing up. Okay, so you would do the same thing, primary, secondaries, and then move to your intermediate or tertiary colors and continue to change your water. Often if I had too much water in my brush, I was taking a little bit out. If I were due to do anything differently here, I probably would have lightened the blue a little bit. The pigment was a little bit heavy in the blue and the red. You can see these are all very equal transparency. So adding a little bit of water, tiny bit of water to that blue would have helped. Okay.